are talking to Mr. Garland Nixon, and we're going to be talking about Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin living that hug life. Nice to finally have you on the show with me on the screen with you, Mr. Garland Nixon.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was this hug that was shown around the world was really left the West in a tizzy. They were just like, oh no, I can see, and maybe this may be the comedic side of me, but I can see somebody like Joe Biden's hair, kind of like Doc Brown from Back to the Future, going kind of crazy, seeing that his two greatest enemies, his two greatest foes, giving a hug to each other. What is your thoughts about how the West may be feeling, especially since you really don't see this as much, especially with like the G7 or the G20. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that both of these world leaders understand the importance of symbolism. That's the main thing. I think it was a very symbolic hug. If you look at the cultures of both of the leaders, right? If you look at the cultures of Russia, I've talked to Russians. I've run into the Russians and that have said, talked about traveling to Russia. And they said, look, Garland, when you're there, don't smile at everybody. You smile too much. I said, why? They said, look, the nature of it is this. If Russians are it's not that they're not friendly and they don't like you. It's that their culture is so much more reserved that if you, and this is basically what they said. They said, if you smile at people all the time, they'll think and they were like, what is the word? I said, crazy. They're like, yeah, if you smile at people all the time, they'll think there's something wrong with you. Think you're nuts. These are, if you look, these are, conservative, traditional cultures, very old cultures. And so the hugging of two powerful leaders is not something that's normal. You can add a lot to the symbolism of that based on who did it, you know what I mean? And the cultures. So that is really an exclamation mark to show that we've come together, not just as two nations that have, similar needs and similar threats, but we've come together in a way that I think we understand that we have to be friends, that we have to be supportive of each other. So I think that symbolized a closeness of the two cultures, realizing that how important it is to both of them for survival. Look, the bottom line is, if we call them the West. I say the U.S. empire, right? And we mean the same thing. The U.S. empire, to me, they're not accustomed now to operating in a rational narrative. They just create a narrative. Well, they did this for whatever reason. They'll make something up and then they'll act as though that's true. So I tend to disregard what, a Blinken or a Biden or whoever on the latest MSNBC or Fox News would say, because they'll make something up that works for their narrative. It doesn't matter if it has any relationship to the truth. I think it was also a reminder to the West that, this business about coming in and making a deal with Russia, as Trump seems to imply, I'll make a deal with Russia and I'll separate them from China and then we can go after China. But with the key being first, right? Because it really means we'll separate Russia from China. We were going to take Russia out first. Well, that didn't work. We'll take China out first, and then we'll go after Russia. I think they both understand that they're both on the menu. It's just a matter of, which one's the appetizer and which one's the main course. And I think it was letting people know, look, ain't going to work. If you have to eat this whole meal or you get nothing at all.
Sabs, what's your thoughts regarding this hug that's been heard around the world? Like, people are, it's really, the West isn't feeling too hot about it. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this really is like Garland was saying, a cultural thing. One of my coworkers was from Russia, and this was when I lived in South Carolina. So you guys know, in the South, people are even more overly friendly when you compare to other parts of the United States. And so she just did not understand that. She was just like, you guys are so open and to people you don't know, like to just go up to someone that you're not really close with and just give them a hug. So she explained too that this is just not the norm for her culture, or like where she comes from in Russia. So when I saw that Vladimir Putin gave a hug to Xi Jinping, like obviously, and not even in private, like in public, I was like, whoa, that's a huge deal. And I wonder, Garland, what do you think about that in reference to BRICS? Because we've been talking about BRICS, I think, for quite a while, at least over a year. And we've been talking about this idea of developing a multipolar world. And if you look at the West, you'll see that there's certain Western countries that are obviously aligned with the United States, right? So Joe Biden will shake hands with Macron or Rishi Sunak, that kind of thing. And nobody bats an eye or looks at it twice. But now we are seeing, because of BRICS, we are seeing leaders of other countries that the West is not so fond of building their own coalition, and in a way that really makes the West feel somewhat intimidated. Where do you think this is going to lead? Because I've heard other countries have also expressed interest in joining BRICS as well.
Well, I think one of the things, I mean, I can't say how it'll end up, but if you interpret the rhetoric about BRICS and about the new a new world economic infrastructure, shall we say? Because I think that's what's important to understand, that after 1945, the U.S. empire started to build an infrastructure that they could control, an economic infrastructure worldwide that they could control, right? IMF and World Bank and all this stuff, which they could, you know, the IMF, for God's sake, has an office in the Pentagon. Okay. So they built this economic infrastructure that would allow them to, you know, dominate the world. Okay. And to use their economic power in a coercive manner if somebody didn't cooperate, et cetera. And I think what we're seeing now is that people who have suffered at the business end of that economic infrastructure are realizing something simple. We can't bargain with the U.S. empire, so we have to build an alternative infrastructure. I think the big, huge error that the U.S. made was when they went after the big dog, when they said, okay, we're going to now start sanctioning Russia, we're going to start sanctioning China, thinking, okay, this is going to work. And the bottom line was the rest of the world was like, look, Russia's got stuff we need. They got gas, they got oil, they got nickel, they got timber, they got coal. You know, this is a big country with all kinds of stuff. Look, you can say what you want, but they have stuff we need. We can't go without it. You know what I mean? Now you're going to cut everybody off. So I think what we're looking at now, one of the ways that people put it is a multipolar world. Lately, I've been just voicing it a little bit different. I've been saying a network with various nodes, because a pole implies that there are points of a pole is like where it ends. You know what I mean? There's an end here and there's an end there. And each one of them is a pole, like a magnet. Each one is a pole, right? And if you think about poles, you take the two poles of a magnet, you can't touch. You try to touch them together and they kind of push each other apart, right? A node implies a network. A node within a network is an important point in the network. When you listen to the rhetoric of China and Russia, what they say is, we want to do business with people with mutual benefits. Everybody eats. We get this, you get that, everybody works out together, right? Now, if one particular country has more gold than anybody else, more oil, more gas, more whatever, that is an important node in the network. But because they got more gas over here and you got more industry over here, China, that needs it, those are important nodes and points in the network. But all of these things together make the network work. Make the network viable. And I think they've seen the results of a polar dynamic where one person has all of the power, or two people, whatever, has all of the power, and they use that coercively. If you create a network, then nobody's taking advantage of anybody. And I think I've even heard them mention what they call it, a more fair, they've used the word fair in one of their, metaphors for the type of world they were building, the type of network they were building. But it has to do with, we've had a taste of domination by somebody. In fact, China even said, we don't want our currency to be the world's reserve currency, because then to some extent we can't control it. We can't control, it'll be based on what's going on out there. So we don't want that kind of headache. We don't want those problems of the world currency being not our currency, and we somewhat lose control of it. So you're looking at countries that have a total different perspective. They've taken a beating under this type of system, and now they're building an infrastructure where everybody's important, everybody benefits mutually. And now what's happening as a result? They've got what you call in business, what is the word? Market insistence, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody wants in. Nobody's calling the U.S. saying, hey, can we get in the SWIFT system? No, but everybody's saying, can we get in BRICS? Why? Because people see an opportunity there, and everybody wants a system where they have faith and confidence that it's not going to be used coercively against them. One of the tells now about the direction the world is going is market insistence. Everybody wants to get in BRICS. So what was it, Indonesia or Malaysia, some other Asian economic giant just the other day said, hey, we want in BRICS. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this actually makes me wonder, and I want to ask you this question, Mr. Garland, and Sabs, if you can also add in what you wish as well.
And Garland's good. You don't have to do it to Mr. It makes me feel old. I'm old, but I don't want to feel old.
I try to be respectful,
That's even worse.
The way my mama's crazy. Yeah. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, would it also be apropos to say that it's really a democratization of world power versus, we live in a really Western hegemonic, more U.S. hegemonic power, where it's almost like the world is set up right now like a corporate business where you have the sole owner at the top, and then it's vassals at the bottom. And you have more like the BRICS countries, particularly Russia and China, saying, no, we're going to make the world into a co-op instead, where we all share the world collectively. Would that be a good way of putting what you just analyzed so far?
I think that's the perfect metaphor. I think that is absolutely perfect. It's interesting that the U.S. always talks about authoritarian versus democracy. But when you look at the economic infrastructure that they built over the last 70 years, it is clearly authoritarian. And what shows you it's authoritarian is they use their economic power in a coercive means. Do what we tell you, or you can't buy anything. You can't use the system. We'll throw you out of the system, right? So it's clearly authoritarian. And it is the U.S., whoever's running the empire, the state, whatever you want to call it, is the authority. And it's exactly, you're right. I'm glad you put it that way. It is, because now you have a bunch of countries that are working together. And even in the context of that, they're looking at two things. Countries doing more business in their own currencies, which will strengthen the currencies of countries, which will make their currencies more sound. Also, they're talking about coming up with some kind of a currency for BRICS. But what's interesting about it is they're saying, look, what if we come up with a currency that can only be used to buy stuff with states? That it isn't like dollars that you can have or anybody can buy. We use something that states, governments can use to buy stuff, but it's not sitting floating out there dollars. They're looking now at a system similar to SWIFT, where it's kind of like money, but it's more like an IOU. So what they're looking at is alternative ways to do this, where everybody benefits, but it doesn't create a dynamic where somebody in the system can become coercive and authoritarian. And I think it's creative. The other thing I think is important too with BRICS is this. Look, everything with the U.S. is about, you've got to ideologically be, into neoliberal capitalism, or you can't be in. Now Russia's about to recognize the Taliban. Right. And they're like, hey, you know what? We got to do business. They got stuff. We can do deals with them. They're going to represent. And here's what they said. They're the government of Afghanistan, and that ain't going to change. They're going to say, well, they're not a terrorist organization. They're the government of this country. But what happens then? They got all kinds of stuff. China and Russia can now come in and say, we'll help you develop this, your gas, your gold, your whatever, right? And they can do business. They're all trying to eat. They're like, look, whatever we may think of your particular way of governing, we're all just trying to eat, bruh. Everybody's trying to eat. Let's figure out how we can do this. It's sensible.
Yeah, I was thinking about this as well too, because like I see BRICS as like a horizontal organization, and I don't see the West that way. I don't see, even though you have all these Western leaders like Biden, Macron, and Rishi. I pick on Rishi Sunak a lot, but and Rishi Sunak. The reality is that the United States is actually the leader. And the rest of those countries in the West just followed the lead of the United States government. It's really weird that they've never been a little bit more. I don't remember those other countries being a little bit more vocal about the fact that, hey, wait a minute, why do you have to be the one that's leading, and why do we have to follow your lead? However, last year there was an interview with Macron, and Macron said he actually proposed the idea of Europe becoming a third power, and question whether or not European countries should continue to follow the lead of the United States. So it seems like there may start to be some type of friction in between there as well.
Yeah, and here's the way I see that. Macron it's a recognition that the power of the U.S. empire is weakening, that the U.S. empire is crumbling, right? And so they're looking at it and like, rather than the leader, I'd put it more like, I'd use the metaphor, the U.S. has been the commander. Because they don't lead. They tell the rest of their countries, you will do this, or otherwise we'll blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. That ain't lead. That's commanding. That's brutally and viciously commanding, right? But I think, Macron's position, and I've said this for a while, is this. I still want to be an imperialist. I still want to be, we want to go out and be able to rule the world and use coercive military and economic power. Therefore, if the U.S. is a weak empire, why don't we make Europe an empire? Why don't we have our own army, our own way, and all that kind of stuff? We break loose from the United States. We come together like the United States of Europe, and then we can do all of the imperialist stuff that the U.S. does, but we can just do it on our own way. So it's not, if you notice, what he didn't say? I want sovereignty for France, so we can do our own thing apart. No. This was not about sovereignty for his own country. He's nobody's economic nationalist. It was just the opposite. If I was in France and he said, yeah, we need a European this and that, I said, whoa, time out. I live in France. I didn't vote for somebody in the Netherlands. I didn't vote for somebody in Spain. Hell no. But he is saying, the imperialist, let's build a new empire. That empire's old, it's weak, it's wearing itself out. We build a new empire and we can go and invade countries, steal their stuff, dominate all the evil imperial things, but we'll do it on our time rather than the US, because they're getting weak. They ain't gonna be able to do it much longer. That's the way I see Macron.
Well, one more quick, and I'll pass it to you, JB, on that same note. Garland, were you surprised, just to pivot here just a little bit, were you surprised some of the Western countries actually took a different position than the U.S. government in reference to the ICC choosing to issue arrest or try to issue arrest warrants towards Netanyahu? Were you surprised that countries like France and Germany, I think also Norway, decided to go along with what the ICC prosecutor wants to do instead of agreeing with the United States with that particular situation?
Not so much, because if you look at historically, those countries have been a little bit further away from the Israeli thing. They haven't necessarily gone with the U.S. and throughout Europe on Israel as much, with the U.S. I think part of it is Israel spends like a fortune as far as the U.K. and the U.S. in owning, having all of these lobbyists and owning those two countries, that it doesn't put as much in the other countries, because Israel's probably figure, as long as we got those two, as long as we got the head, the body will follow, right? I think the pressure, internal pressure from the people of those countries is so high that the government has to respond. I also think, to be quite frank, I'm not overly impressed with the ICC charges. If you look at it, come on, really? It would be, I put it like this. It would be like in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in whatever it was, 1943, if the ICC came in and said, okay, yeah, what the Nazis did to these people was terrible, so we're going to charge the leaders of the Nazi leaders, and we're going to charge the leaders of the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. But wait a minute. You know what I mean? That makes they're prisoners in a ghetto, and you're going, oh no, but this is equal. And we can only start the time clock for the charges from the day that the Warsaw Ghetto uprising started. Not when all the Nazis rounded people up, slaughtered them, and threw them into a ghetto and started starving them. We'll forget all of that. We'll start from the day the uprising. You know what I mean? If you look at it, it's still pretty absurd. There's just, I could go on and on about that. So the charges are ragged and weak, to be honest, at best. But the internal pressure is different. Well, actually, it ain't getting. If you look at what's going on in the U.S., it isn't much different. But the U.S. Government is in a different position. They're wholly, completely, fully owned by the and I always say this: not the Israeli, the American Israeli AIPAC political, right? AI, American Israel is what AIPAC, the first two letters. The money that's going that AIPAC uses to bribe America don't come from Israel. It comes from the American billionaire and wealthy Zionists. So when people say, oh, well, that's Israeli money, actually, no, it really isn't. It's American. It's a billionaire Zionist right here that's given that money, because we can go on and on. But, you know, the value of Israel as a military outpost in a sea of oil, they can't let that go.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely. And one of the things that, and to prove your point, it was actually brought out in a UN report that there is liquefied natural gas under Gaza in the West Bank, and then also off the coast of Gaza, that there is oil that is there as well. So, of course, they do not want at all to give up that piece of land, because that's resources there. Also, the fact that they actually want to compete with the Suez Canal by making the Ben Gurion Canal within that same area there too. So really, ultimately, what we always go back to is it's about money and resources. Like Sabby always says, follow the money. And so it's absolutely true there. And just as a side note, this whole hug between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, it reminds me of that skit in Key and Peele where Barack Obama is hugging all the black people. And he's like, come here, bring it in. It makes me kind of think about that, you know. So that's just one of the things I was thinking about when I saw them hug. Xi Jinping was like, bring it in, bro, bring it in. But one of the things I want to share, actually, was this article out of Bloomberg. And the funny thing is how the Western media are always trying to spin things into more of a pro-Western narrative. This actually says Putin and Xi vowed to step a fight to counter U.S. containment. It's funny how they word it like that. Like they're trying to contain the United States. Like they're trying to actually do something bad against the United States. Before we get into a little bit deeper into the article, just on just this alone and talking about Western propaganda, what is your thoughts about just the way they worded this, talking about stepping up to fight to counter U.S. containment?
A couple of things. Number one, I interpret that is the U.S. constantly is now particularly says we've got to contain China and contain Russia, right? The word that they use. So they're saying Russia and China, we got to step up to counter what the U.S. is trying to do, which implies this, that the U.S. doesn't want Russia and China to grow economically, diplomatically, politically. They want to make them weak so the U.S. can continue to dominate, right? And so, but here's the reality. The word containment means suppression and oppression. The U.S. wants to stop China from growing to, what have they said? We want regime change in Russia. We want the people of Russia to rise up and take out Vladimir Putin. Well, that ain't containment, is it? We want regime change in China. Well, that's not containment. They use this. It's like deterrence. You know what I mean? Well, we're going to surround Russia and China with bases and point missiles at them to deter them. Really? Yeah. So I walk up and stick a gun in your head. Your hands are in your pockets. You're sitting there watching TV. And I walk up and put a gun in your head and cock the trigger to deter you from what? So it's just that whole containment thing is using language to hide the malice of the imperialism of the United States, the malicious and vicious nature of it, the idea that the U.S. has a right, dare I say, a duty to say which countries in the world can rise and which ones can't, that these countries can't naturally work their own way and do things that work for them and rise and make their country better. And as our country falls apart, we don't have to fix it. We don't have to repair it. If technologically both of those countries are in the passing lane, but rather than educate our students, we use them to make money with student loans. We prey on our students economically. So the United States actually could not improve itself to compete with China and Russia, because that's not what neoliberal capitalism does. It doesn't work that way. This system can't. A lot of people say, well, why don't we just try to improve ourselves so that we can compete with them? That's not the way the system works. This system doesn't do this. It takes money from the working class and extracts from the working class and gives it all to the rich. So we couldn't if we wanted to. It's not the way our system works. So instead, we have to try to hold that. It's the Tanya Harding. I can't defeat you skating. I know. I see you're better than I am. So I'll just get this here piece of lead pipe and bust you in the kneecaps.
I'm having flashbacks of the Tanya Harding incident. Oh my God. Nancy, what was her face? Carrington. Nancy Carrington is actually she's from here in Massachusetts, by the way, people.
Right.
For those who don't know, she grew up in Stoneham, Massachusetts. There's not much to do in Stoneham, so maybe that's why she got into figure skating. But speaking of the economics, I want to show you this about the banks, because I know I've shown this like multiple times, but I never get tired of showing it, because I want people to understand why I feel the U.S. government is heavily trying to demonize China in particular. If you look at like the top banks in the world, let me just make this a little bit bigger. The top banks in the world, you'll see, and it shows the current rank and the previous rank. So you'll see Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. Number 2 is China Construction Bank Corporation. Number 3 is Agricultural Bank of China. Number 4 is Bank of China. And then when you get to number 5 is JP Morgan Chase Bank National Association. So you don't even see an American bank until you get to number 5. China has 4 of the top 5 banks here. And I really think like this is one of the things that the US government is really worried about, because China has become such an economic power. And then Bank of America is the next American bank, I believe, that you'll see like further down as ranked as number 8. But the reality is it didn't always used to be this way. It was not always this way in reference to like who were the top 5 banks in the world. And now here we are.
Well, and here's the bottom line. China has found a system, has not found a system, has created a system that's effective on the world market. You know, they've created a system using their values of socialism, using their ability to work within the context of an international market, right? Using their ability, their understanding the importance of delivering. See, one of the things you look at that I think is important to understand about all of this is, if you look, the last poll I saw, over 90, somewhere between 90 and 95% of Chinese people had a positive approval of their government. Well, we saw Vladimir Putin just got won with 87% of the vote. And American polls showed him at 86% approval rating. So it aligned. And of course, they said he stole it. And I thought, well, that sure was a lot of work to get an extra 1%. But the bottom line is this. Why? Why is it? If you're going to take on imperialism, if you're going to deal with the imperialists, you have to deliver for your people. You got to deliver, right? And so one of the things that both of these countries have done is delivered. If you look at Russia, if you understand their lost decade in the 1990s, Vladimir Putin came in and he is their FDR. He came in during bad times and they're living better now. So he has delivered. If you look at the 800 million people out of poverty, socialism with Chinese characteristics, I don't care what you think out of it, it has delivered. And if you look at, you know, you can call Russia whatever you want, but having gone to Venezuela and traveling to South America, well, here's what I found. The kind of socialism, when I talk to the people in Venezuela, simple. Look, here's what we want to do. Our country has oil, gold, whatever. We want our government to own those companies. We want our government to sell that stuff. We want our government to use the money from oil and gold and all the things other to run the country, so they don't have to tax us to get to death. And then to build houses for the poor and do all this. So, but look at Russia. You can call it capitalism. You can call it whatever you want to. They got these gigantic companies that sell oil and gas. And they use that money just like China has big companies, right? And Russia has the legacy of the Soviet Union in the DNA of that country. And one of the things they do is they have huge companies, unthinkable in neoliberal capitalism. Yeah. But think of the kind of money that Russia is making selling gas, selling oil, timber, coal, you name it, they got it. And so they're making a fortune. So guess what happens? They can build stuff. They're steadily building. They're steadily providing for their people. Now, the latest thing that they said with this new government is, well, we got to do something for families, tax breaks, because they want the families to have more children. You know, a lot of countries are having issues with that, where people aren't having as many children. They're like, well, how can we do that? We need money for them. We need stuff. They don't want to say, hey, have more kids. What they want to say is, let's make it easier for the people to do that, and our country can grow. So what you have is people who are saying, you know what? Perhaps if the government sells our most valuable natural resources, takes that money and uses it for the people, we'll be better off. Russia's doing the same thing as China, and it's working. And ExxonMobil, they're looking at the U.S. saying, "Oh my God, we can't let that model get out."
You know what? Let me say this, Garland. What you just laid out, this would make the progressives very angry. That Russia is actually a better social democracy than the other European countries that they praise. They will praise Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. We want a thriving social democracy, but the moment you mention Russia, they're tight-lipped. They don't want to say a word. But yet, Russia is actually doing social democracy better than these thriving social democracies that the progressives tout all the time. That is just blows my mind. And it's like the more I learn, I'm just like, wait a minute. They have a history of having actual true socialism. They may have deviated from that, but they didn't deviate as far as we in the West think, because we're constantly being told, oh my God, they have bread lines. Oh my God, all these horrible things are happening in Russia. They eat tree bark and they walk bears instead of dogs. I don't know what it is, but that's how they make it sound in Russia, right? And so from learning more, it just seems like, wait, and it starts to make sense now as the popularity of somebody like Vladimir Putin in Russia. And so when you said that Vladimir Putin's really the FDR of their FDR right now, it makes sense as to his popularity. And it makes sense as to why the sentiment is, such a, his approval rating is so high, because a lot of people say, well, they're forced to have, to approve of him because he's authoritarian. I'm like, what would you rather have? An authoritarian of the working people, or the authoritarian by the working people? Or would you have an authoritarian by the corporations? Because either way you get it, you're going to have an authority, but who's in that authority, I think, is what matters the most.
And I'll add this. And how do you define an authoritarian? How in the heck is somebody with 87% approval rating considered an authoritarian? What is it? It's not like he has to go beat the people down. You better do this or else. They love him. I deal with.
You're going to approve me.
Exactly. 87% of approval. But it comes down to this.
Yeah.
When it comes to a government, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of a government? And that's easy. And those of us on the left, what is our argument? Does it deliver for the masses, or does it deliver for a tiny few, right? If I look at, China, 800 million people out of poverty. You can't deliver for the masses any more than that. And if you look at Russia, it came from the 1990s of abject, absolute poverty to right now one of the fastest growing economies on the face of this planet. I'm not saying there isn't poverty in Russia. Once you get there are some poor areas, but I'll put it like this: the people are happy with their government. The other thing is this: it's a more conservative country. So the conservative cultural views of Vladimir Putin align with the people of Russia. When it comes to his cultural views, he's just another Russian. You know what I'm saying? And you talk to the Russians, you know, the kind of stuff here, the kind of the LGBTQ stuff and all that the West is, it's not that Vladimir Putin isn't into that. That ain't the Russian people. And one of the things the Russians talk about is Afghanistan. Yeah, we may not like some of the things that they're doing or the way they do things, but that's their country, that's their history, that's their culture, that's their religion. We'll do business with them. One of the things that BRICS, one of the agreements in BRICS is not to interfere with the internal workings of each other, of countries. Hey, look, and if you got a problem with something a country's doing internally, you go to the UN, you use the international bodies to address that. But you don't unilaterally, or BRICS doesn't say, well, you don't look out for this group or that group. If they got an issue, they use the international bodies that exist. So they're doing their thing. They're all trying to survive, but they're not judgmental of other countries. If you look at the Russian Federation, you got areas of Russia where on the Chinese border, where you look at the people and you're like, well, clearly they're Asian people. They look like they're Chinese. Well, they're on the Chinese border. There's an arbitrary border there, but they kind of really are, you know, ethnically. You got the areas where it's Muslim. The people are flat out Muslims. You know, the Chechens, that's a Muslim region. You go to places in Siberia where there's indigenous, the Yakut Indians. So when you go throughout the Russian Federation, it's so big, you find areas that have a specific culture to that area, specific region, religion, etc. So they've learned to accept everybody in their own country. So that's why they ain't going around the world telling various countries to do this or that, because the odds are, if you got a Muslim country, they got a region that aligns with you. And that's what the U.S. The empire feels like we got to go around the world and everybody's got to think like us and be like us and act like us, or else. That ain't Russia and China. And that's not what the new economic infrastructure they're building is all about.